Season 1, Episode 4 of Queer as Folk, Ted's Not Dead. Minor spoiler alert, I guess. So it was directed by Kevin Inch and written by Richard Kramer, and it first aired in the United States on December 17th, 2000. So now we're on to the first episode of the series that wasn't filmed at the same time as the first 3 were. So we open at the Liberty Diner, and Michael is still narrating.
Last Saturday night at Babylon was to die for.
When he says that, always feels a little cringe. So this is the episode for me where I feel like the voiceovers just aren't working anymore. They're not really landing. The first 3 episodes, it was fine. We were being introduced to the world through Michael, and everything was kind of in relation to him, and it basically just felt a little unnecessary to me, and the people who make the show maybe seem to agree because the voiceovers are pretty much gone after this episode. And I might have said this before, but the voiceovers in the show in those first 4 episodes, they really tell us that Michael is the main character, and we learn everything as it is in relation to him, and that's something that really changes in the first season of the show. So Brian, Michael, and Emmett are all sitting at the diner eating in silence. So Michael starts to tell them the story of what he did last night. So he met a guy at Babylon, he took him back to his place, and the guy tells him that he went to Brazil and got some Brazilian beach parasites in his butt, and I mean, it's nice of him to tell Michael, right? He could have just, I don't know, this guy just seemed really nice and great and perfect, and then we learn about Emmett's night, and he's basically in a leather sex dungeon thing. The guy that he's with is an undertaker. I think it's morticians now. And then Emmett says something here that's interesting, though. He says, so you're bi. I don't know if it's worth noting or not, but that is said without any negativity at all. As we see later on in the show, that attitude definitely changes. But it's nice to see for now that it's, yeah. I do love this whole scene with Emmett and the Undertaker, though. It's really funny. So Brian says that he had sex with an Undertaker once, and he said that sometimes they sew the mouth shut. So there's a lot of talk of Undertakers and dead bodies from Emmett and from Brian. And so this is all they're talking about this, the night of, or the morning after that Ted overdosed and might die. So they're kind of all just pondering their mortality a little bit here, probably, or just they've got death on the brain. I mean, Emmett literally slept with an Undertaker last night, so there's that. But so then Emmett asks Brian what he did last night, and we see a flashback of him just being with Justin at the loft. But Brian tells them,
I made an early evening.
Why does he do that? There are a few reasons, I think, why he says that. First of all, we see the look on Michael's face before Brian answers and after Brian answers. So before he answers, Michael is clearly not happy. I mean, remember Michael saw at the end of the last episode, Brian and Justin were dancing very closely on the dance floor at Babylon. So I think Michael is just kind of worried about what the answer is going to be. Which he's a little hypocritical since he went home with the buttworms guy, but... And anyways, so Brian had to have seen that look on Michael's face too. So maybe he said that to make Michael feel better, or to not upset the status quo that they've got going on right now. It seems to be a very precarious balance between the two of them right now, ever since Justin came into the picture. And he also probably might have seen, depending on how you look at that last scene in 103, seen Michael staring at the two of them on the floor too, and he was giving some real murdery, not happy vibes right there. And from everything that we saw in the last episode, Brian knows that Michael doesn't really like Justin and wants him to get out of their lives.
He's over there talking to my mother, little prick.
And from everything else we've seen, Brian seems to know about the feelings that Michael has for him. He's probably lying to spare his feelings because Brian doesn't usually take home the same person more than once, which is something he's done with Justin, and he's seen Justin multiple times. Usually, Brian picking up all these random guys doesn't really bother Michael because Michael knows that they're not going to stay, and there's no chance of that leading to anything more. So, there's the Michael of it all for why Brian lied right there, but then there's also the fact that Brian kind of has this, like, I don't know, sex god persona thing. So he basically just wants to keep up this image and not let them know that he's been with Justin again or with anyone again. And then there's the fact that neither Michael or Emmett comment on the fact that Brian went home alone and called it an early evening. It feels like normally they would, because when would Brian ever do that? Like, how often does Brian just go out for a night at Babylon and then he's like, you know what, I'm just gonna call it an early evening by myself? Michael probably doesn't say anything about that because he's so relieved, and maybe part of him knows that he's lying, like a really teeny tiny part. And then Emmett doesn't say anything, I think probably partly because he's so preoccupied about everything that's happened with Ted, but maybe also because he saw Justin and Brian dancing last night, so he probably knows that Brian is lying. And I think he knows how Michael feels about Brian, so that he doesn't say anything. It's quite the web. It's quite the tangled web that's present here. Not even to mention the Ted of it all. So they're all laughing, and then Debbie comes over, all disapproving.
Shouldn't you boys be getting to the hospital?
So maybe they're trying to retain a sense of normalcy here. by going to the diner like they normally would, talk about the night before. And maybe it's also to show the contrast between them living their lives and telling all of these stories against Ted's situation. Something just feels a little bit off the whole time that they're sitting there at the diner talking. I mean, obviously we the audience know that last we saw Ted was on the floor, not doing well. So maybe part of it is like life goes on, and also maybe they're trying to distract themselves from what happened. Not to bring up the UK version of the show too much, here are some major spoilers if you haven't seen that version of Queer as Folk, but I like how they did it in that. In that version of the show, the Ted character died. His name was Phil, and I'll talk more about that closer to the end. And it's like a hard cut to the group laughing over brunch, kind of intercut with the dead body on the floor, and so it's just so jarring going from the laughing because they don't know what's happened to their friend yet. So going from that, cutting to the dead body, it's very... I just liked the stark contrast there, and it just hits so hard in that you see these people going about their daily lives without a care in the world compared to Phil dead on the floor. But I get why they did that a little bit differently here, because Ted's not dead, as we know from the title of the episode. Ted is in a coma, so it's not going to play quite the same when he's lying in a hospital bed. Also in the UK version, he had been lying on his kitchen floor dead for a few days, and it just made the whole thing even more like no one noticed that he was gone, and just so sad, and it really played into the character and all of that, and it's just whatever. I loved how that played out, but I'm really glad that Ted's alive. I don't think they could have done this any other way, like this scene, or even that they should have. I think this is the best that they could do while keeping Ted alive. So they go to see Ted in the hospital, and Ted is in a coma, as we learn, because Ted's not dead. So they're kind of there making jokes, and I think it's just kind of their way of dealing with everything a little bit. So we meet Ted's mother. Her name is Margaret Schmidt.
If you need permission to see him, I'll give it. I'm sure he'd appreciate it.
And then she tells us some key information for the episode, and that is that the doctors don't think that Ted's going to make it out of the coma. So I feel like this is just something important to keep in mind for the rest of the episode, something that is stated multiple times in the episode. None of the doctors think that Ted is going to make it out of this coma. As far as all the characters in the show know, Ted is going to die probably pretty soon. And I remember the first time that I watched this thinking, okay, so this character is gonna die. And then Ted's mom says something that I kind of like.
About 5 o'clock in the morning, it occurred to me, loving someone's not the same as knowing them.
And isn't that the truth, Ted's mom? So you can love someone and truly love them, but still not know who they really are as a person. She knew that Ted was gay, but she probably, all of a sudden she gets a call. Your son is in a coma from a drug overdose, and she's probably just thinking like, how did this happen? How did he get there? How did I not know him enough to know that this could ever happen? So Brian looks a little bit uncomfortable. He kind of looks away, and then he sees a hot male nurse. Michael then yells out,
Brian.
because Brian's looking at this guy and he's saying it like, how could you be checking out someone at a moment like this? But Michael yelling out just seems much more rude and disruptive, just much worse than what Brian's doing. Like, no one noticed except for Michael. No one was looking at Brian in that moment except for Michael. Ted's mom certainly wasn't looking at Brian. No one knew what he was doing. And him yelling and making a scene and pointing that out is just like 10 times worse. And then we have Brian looks away like he's ashamed, like, oh, you're right. How could I at a moment like this? And then we're back to Justin. Justin's mom comes in and says that he's late and he goes to take a shower. So she pulls out his sketch pad from his bag. She sees lots of sketches of football players and a lot of guys' butts. And on one page is the name Brian just written over and over and over again. Brian and Michael and Emmett are looking through the window into Ted's room. Emmett wonders who gave Ted the drugs, and Michael says,
I bet it was that guy Blake who was cruising him all night.
You think we should tell someone?
No.
and they all kind of seem to silently agree with Brian then, like it's some code or something. I get it, probably have good reason to think that if the law were to go after Blake for anything, it'd be more about the fact that, he was gay and what the two of them were doing than the fact that he had some GHB. And I don't even know that Blake would deserve being reported to the police. I mean, you could say that it was illegal for him to have drugs in the first place, so of course he should. But Ted did choose to take the drugs. Obviously, a real bummer what happened, but he chose to take them. He didn't drug him unintentionally or lie to him about what was in them, but the drugs were illegal. I think my judgment here is just really clouded by what we learn about Blake when we learn more about what happened that night. That's in a later episode, so we'll get to that.
At this semi-orgy.
Semi? When? So did you, like, plan it?
Michael seems really jealous that he was not invited to this spontaneous semi-orgy. I love how when Brian says the Todds, Emmett holds up his pinky. Also, I always wondered if that part where Emmett holds up his finger, if that was in the script or not, and I can confirm now that it is not. Not to say that it couldn't have gotten added in a later thing, or that it wasn't added on the day, but whatever, it's not in there in this version. And then Brian says that it couldn't be one of them in there because they know better.
We know not to believe pretty little blonde boys who tell you that it's really good shit. Because that's what they all say.
I mean, isn't that kind of what he did to Justin in the first episode, though?
My disco pharmacologist cooks this up for me. Ted didn't know that. And he didn't know that you only do drugs with your friends because they're the only ones that give a fuck about you.
Which is true, and which goes back to the last episode, when we saw Brian and Michael doing drugs together and that went fine, versus Ted doing drugs with Blake and then how that ended. Brian leaves to go to work. Justin is in class. They're talking about The Great Gatsby. Justin is sketching a naked man sitting down from behind, pretty openly in class. I mean, that takes something to just draw a naked person in the middle of your English class. And the teacher calls on Justin. So then Justin says what yearning is.
Yearning's when you want something really badly. Like, so bad it hurts.
So this always feels like a case to me of adults writing how they think teenagers speak, using the word like a lot. And I'm not saying that teenagers don't say like a lot, or that I don't. I'm just never a fan of when that gets put into TV shows depicting teens. It's just a little bit annoying. It's like, yeah, I know, they don't speak good. So the teacher's really pleased with Justin's answer. Chris Hobbs seems to kind of be interested in Justin. I'm not imagining that, right? Justin is looking at Chris. Chris doesn't notice this, and the teacher's saying something like, when you want something you can't have. Hobbs is messing around with another student, and the teacher gives him detention, cleaning out the athletic room after school. So then Michael and Emmett go talk to Ted's mom, and Emmett says that Ted wasn't a drug user.
He must have met someone that night. And took him home.
Which seems really unnecessary for him to say that. He could have just said, oh, someone must have given him the drugs, or not said anything. But the emphasis and what he says just kind of seem a little bit unnecessary. It's like he's just rubbing salt in the wound. I mean, not that I'm saying that should be adding salt into it, but his mother's having a bad enough day as it is. I get that it's a tough situation and sometimes you don't know what to say or the right thing to say, but I mean, clearly we've seen that Michael doesn't know the right thing to say already.
Brian.
If my son had been straight, if he had taken a woman home, do you think she would have run off and left him there to die?
Which is rough. I don't know, it's hard to say. Like, there's so many variables. I just think it depends more on the person than the gender. I mean, obviously, Justin seems to have gone to the athletic room where Chris Hobbs is. So Justin is flirting with Chris Hobbs. And then Melanie barges into Brian's office. And apparently she's Ted's lawyer. And he made a living will. And Ted basically decided to make Brian responsible for choosing when to pull the plug on him if the situation ever arose. So Brian's not happy about this.
This secret you two have been sharing. When were you planning on telling me?
So then Chris Hobbs opens up a Pepsi and passes it to Justin. And we also see the Babylon stamp is still on Justin's hand. And we know that Justin showered in the morning because we saw him go to have one. So either that stamp just stays on like really, really well, or he was trying not to wash it off. Chris Hobbs is talking to Justin about girls. So then Justin starts rubbing and unzips his pants and gives him a hand job. And Chris Hobbs is really into it. Shortly after he finishes, the teacher walks in.
Shouldn't you be working?
We see Justin smile. Justin is obviously very pleased with himself. Also, whenever I see this, I'm always like, yeah, you go, Justin. So this is the first sexual encounter we've seen of Justin's that is with someone other than Brian. So he's finally starting to branch out a little bit. I like that he's finally realized, oh, there are other people out there too. I don't have to be 100% hung up on Brian Kinney 100% of the time. I guess the main question here is, was Chris Hobbs inviting Justin to do that? Or did he not, but then he just kind of, went with it? He definitely enjoyed it and wanted it to happen once it was happening. But did he plan for Justin to do that? To me, it seems like he did. It seems like that's what he was angling for all along. That's what he hoped would happen. Just from how we saw him looking at Justin earlier in class. And then he was saying stuff like,
Thought you weren't into, like, sports and shit. Thanks.
and then maybe he even saw the drawing. I don't know, but he probably suspects that Justin is gay just from the things that he says to him. I mean, I say he probably suspects Justin is gay, but really, the whole school should know that Justin is gay because he showed up to school. Brian dropped him off in the Jeep and it had the F slur spray painted onto the side of it. And this guy's dropping him off. And they have a very close conversation and Brian yells at that kid. So, I mean, everybody knows, right? But from what we kind of see later on, the show kind of seems to forget that the whole school already knows this. Because you know that was spread around the whole school. But anyways, Chris seems to probably know that Justin is gay. And from how he looked at Justin and the fact that he just started rubbing himself like that right beside him, I think that he was inviting him to do that. There wasn't one tiny moment of shock on his face or anything at all. So I think the answer is yes. Michael and Emmett are in the steam room and then Brian comes in.
Why me? Why not his mother? Why not you?
Because I can't decide what to wear in the morning.
Me neither. And Michael says he couldn't either. But it's interesting that Brian only or first asks why not Emmett. So it seems to be saying that Ted and Emmett are a little bit closer friends than Ted and Michael.
I don't even like Ted.
Oh, come on, you do so.
I'm not enough to be responsible for his fucking life.
Aw, so that's basically Brian admitting that he does like Ted.
Maybe he's secretly in love with you.
So obviously this is ironic because we know that Ted is secretly in love with Michael. And Michael is secretly in love with Brian. Everybody is secretly in love with everybody, basically. Except for Justin. He has no secrets. He is not secretly in love with anyone. He is outwardly, what's the opposite of secretly? Not a secret that he loves Brian and that he's obsessed with him. Interesting that the teenager is the only one who can be honest about that and the adults can't.
I love you. I'm comatose. Kill me.
So then Justin and Daphne are laying on Justin's bed, and I love this shot and how they're laying there. And he's telling her about Chris Hobbs.
I thought you were in love with that Brian guy.
Me and Chris? That's not love, Daph. That's just fucking.
So he still thinks that he's in love with Brian, but he seems to see the difference between that and what he does with other people. Obviously ironic that because that's what Brian said that him and Justin were doing.
You wanted me, and I wanted you. That's all it was.
Fuck?
Apparently Justin has quit the art club and didn't tell his mother.
A week's like a long time.
There's that teen speak again.
Well, I thought you might like to know I'm going to Nike Town, but you're probably not interested in that either. You can drive.
And he is really interested in that. I guess Justin is just obsessed with Nike Town. And now we're back at the diner and Michael is just watching his mother. He's smiling at something that she does with her hands and her nose. And I think that Michael meeting Ted's mother and seeing just how she is about him being gay and everything really makes him appreciate his mom a lot more. Thank God.
Lemon bars. They're great today.
And this is the first mention that we get of the famous Liberty Diner lemon bars. So then we're back with Justin and his mom. Justin's still got that stamp on his hand. He is really dedicated to keeping it there.
It's just nice. You laughed. It's been a while.
Yeah, Justin really hasn't been too nice to his mom lately. Or very happy at home, I guess. I guess with everything that he's dealing with about himself right now. And then she grosses him out with talk of kissing her boyfriend when she was 20. So then she sees the stamp on his hand. Maybe not such a wise decision to keep it, Justin. But I get it. It's also probably part of like he wants to show the world who he is, and or just he wants to keep like a memento from that night because it was such a great and momentous occasion for him. And so she sees the stamp on his hand and then she just says,
So do you have a boyfriend, Justin?
and then this really tense music starts playing and Justin looks really freaked out.
You can tell me. I promise you I won't tell your father.
Okay, so she knows that his father probably wouldn't react very well. Or maybe she's, also trying to show some trust between her and Justin. From this, we learn that Justin's dad isn't the best person, probably, and wouldn't react well to the news that he's gay.
I don't.
And who's Brian?
And then Justin just stops the car, gets out, and starts running. Like, booking it up the road, just full sprint right down the middle of the road. Now, at first when I saw this, I thought it was just like completely ridiculous for him to do that. Like, really, Justin, you're just gonna like jump out of a moving car, and it wasn't technically still moving, but you're just gonna jump out of the car and just start booking it. This is one of those things that made me think that Justin was kind of cringy, or did a lot of cringy things in the beginning, I guess, and made it a little bit hard for me to get through it because I just had to keep pausing and pausing. But like I mentioned in the last episode, that don't really feel that way when I watch it now. And he's just a teen expressing genuine human emotion. And but anyways, now when I see this, I get it a lot more than I did before. I understand that he's just feeling so completely overwhelmed because his two worlds are colliding right now, especially when he's just starting to figure out this other side of himself and really exploring that. And then his mom just kind of bursts right in, and the idea of her knowing about it is just kind of too much for him when he doesn't even know all of it himself. Maybe, I don't know. It just makes things a lot more complicated. Really isn't ready for her to know. It's his thing right now. He's probably also terrified of how that's going to change things. I mean, their relationship has already changed a lot because he hasn't said anything, but now she knows it's just going to change so much more. And obviously, we know that there's at least some issues with his father, and he just doesn't know how to deal right now and just kind of takes off. So Michael goes to see Mrs. Schmidt in the chapel at the hospital.
I said, tell me the name of one special friend. And he said, well, there's a Michael.
So out of everyone, Ted mentioned Michael. And so, like I said before, Ted's mom seems to know that he's gay and seems to have known for a while now. And the way she said special friend, that wording for someone in her situation right now, seems to mean that she meant someone that he was seeing or interested in or something. And he said Michael. And we know that he's kind of in love with Michael. But it's interesting how Michael didn't really pick up on that at all. But then she says that she's going to go to Ted's condo and pick up some pajamas for him.
I don't know if he even wears them, but if he does, he'll need them when...
So again, she loves her son, but she doesn't really know him. But I would also say that it's not really weird for a mother not to know what her adult son wears to go to sleep at night. Like, 'cause it's not that strange, right? Michael seems to be a little worried about her going to his condo.
And remember his 33rd birthday last year?
When we gave him those 33 dildos, that was hilarious.
Brian stops by Melanie and Lindsay's house, and he holds his son. He smiles at him, and he kisses him, and it's just so cute. I love that little moment that he has with Gus, because we haven't gotten to see that very often in the show yet. So then he quickly hands him off and stops smiling as soon as Melanie comes down. So he has no problem showing that side of himself around Lindsay, and, has no problem being vulnerable around her, but not around Melanie. But also, Lindsay pushes him to do this.
You have time to kiss your son.
But, maybe that's part of the problem. Like, if Melanie saw him being like that with his son, she might see that he could maybe actually be a good father or an okay one. But I get it, the two of them have a very antagonistic relationship.
Did I barge in here at bath time? Was that me?
Fuck bath time and fuck you.
And then Lindsay says,
But he chose you.
this is your responsibility now. This is what he wants.
Well, he chose wrong.
Yeah, that's what I said to him. I said, Brian is not the person you want responsible for your life. He's a selfish, narcissistic little fucking faggot. And let me tell you something, it's not because you suck cock, it's because you're a little fucking coward.
Whoa. I'm always like, there's some really harsh words coming from Melanie right now. And it's not even like this is about Gus or anything, which I would then understand why she's so mad and lashing out. So I guess she could say that he's a coward because, he doesn't want to do the thing that Ted asked him to do. But I don't blame him. I definitely would not want to be responsible for that decision. Can't you get like a proxy or like a lawyer or like a something, or like the courts assign someone, or I don't know what I'm talking about. But can't you get like someone to decide that? Who has like an objective opinion? Is that not a thing? Because it's a lot to put on someone, like someone that you know, especially when you don't ask the person beforehand. I mean, I understand why Ted didn't ask beforehand, because the answer would have been no, but, it's a lot. Anyways, Brian looks a little taken aback by this, kind of like, whoa, hey. He looks to Lindsay, who just kind of looks like, I don't know, I kind of can't believe it either. I can't say anything about it, though. So Lindsay and Brian kind of seem to be on their own wavelength. Like, they can silently communicate with each other, but because of Lindsay's relationship with Melanie, she can't really say anything against her in that moment.
He's probably never going to wake up, and he is depending on Brian to show him the decency, the kindness to release him.
That's all the more reason to be kind. After all, he's the one who has to do it. Think how hard it must be. Or if it were one of us. If it was me lying there and you had to pull the plug.
I'm not sure I could.
Maybe that's why you're so angry at him. Because if it were you, you'd be as scared and angry as he is.
Then Melanie just kind of seems to accept that she's right. Well, obviously, Lindsay thinks that Melanie was way out of line, but she couldn't say anything in front of Brian. I mean, as she shouldn't, that's her partner. I think that's true a bit, the part about why she's so mad, and she has a lot of jealousy issues there about him and Lindsay. She knows that she had to do that for Lindsay, or even Ted, it would be too hard. So then think how hard it is for Brian, too. Also, let's not forget that had Brian shown him the decency to do that or end his life as early as she wanted him to, Ted would be dead, so... Oh, he might be dead? Oh, maybe not, if he was going to wake up anyway. I don't know. Brian is in the back room of Babylon, getting some pain management, as he calls it later on in the series. So I think he's doing this to try and distract himself or to try to make himself feel better. Maybe he's even trying to retain some sense of normalcy or get back to that, but then he just can't. He pushes all the guys away and puts on his sunglasses and then leaves. So even that's not helping like it usually does. Then Justin tells Daphne that his mom knows.
I've got to find Brian.
What for?
He'll know what to do.
Like he cares.
He wants me. I'm gonna live with him. I'm gonna be with him. You'll see.
Okay, so Justin's instinct here is to go to Brian, after Daphne, of course, because he sees him as someone who knows what to do in these kinds of situations, who can handle anything, who's been there before, which is a direct contrast between the scene we just saw Brian in, where he doesn't know what to do at all. It's also just kind of funny that Justin doesn't know that Brian is dealing with so much right now, like literally life and death, and he just has no idea, and he's got his own, you know, drama going on in his life. Interesting that Daphne can see that Brian probably wouldn't care that much, just because of everything that Justin's told her about Brian, but even, you know, she can filter through all that and see the truth. Also, Justin says that Brian wants him, and to be fair, that's true, because, you know, that's what Brian has shown him. Brian told him that he never sleeps with someone more than once.
I've had you.
But then he did again. And not only that, but he went after Justin. So I think that Justin is right in that, but was so wrong, and I'm gonna live with him. I'm gonna be with him. Anyways, he's definitely misjudging the situation at the end there. I also always wonder why Daphne's grounded. Is it because she missed her curfew or something the night before because she was out with Justin? Like the night that they went out in 103? Or is it like completely unrelated? I don't know. It doesn't seem unrelated, but I don't know. Why isn't Justin grounded? But he needs her help, and she gives him a ride. So Michael and Emmett are in Ted's apartment.
Cheddar, brie. I don't think there are particularly strong shame issues attached to cheese.
So then they start having a sword fight with a couple of massive dildos. And it opens Ted's wardrobe, and he's got like a creepy serial killer collage of pictures of Michael in there, including a shirtless one that I'm pretty sure is different from the other shirtless one that he has at work. So he's got a few of those. Emmett shows this to Michael. I mean, like, really, Ted, what are you thinking? Like, there's being in love with someone, and then there's having a creepy, scary obsession about them. Also, it even feels like really risky for him to have those there. Like, his friends have probably been there before, and there's at least a possibility of them going in there. Like, wouldn't you just be terrified that one of them would find your collage? Just to have it taped up to your dresser like that, it feels risky. Justin tries to buzz into Brian's apartment, but he's not there.
What about the crazy lady?
What crazy lady?
You know, the weird one from the diner.
You mean Debbie?
Emmett and Michael are having a talk at Woody's.
I think it means he likes you. I think it means he loves me.
Yeah, that level's gotta be love.
There's a lot of things we don't know about each other. Like, did you know I used to walk down the street in Hazelhurst, Mississippi, and the postman would spit at me?
I don't know where my father was born. Or even who he is.
So this is another one of those things that changes later on in the series. Just another one of those little inconsistencies. And I'm not complaining about it, I'm just pointing it out. Michael's father situation, from what he says here, seems to change. And don't worry, I'll flash back to this when I get there.
I sat with my dead grandma for an hour and held her hand before I told anyone she was dead. How come we never tell each other these things, huh?
And I just love this moment between the two of them here. So obviously Emmett had a rough childhood. Everyone knew or could tell that he was gay, and he was not treated well at all, but he seems to have been close to his grandmother. Also, see again here that Michael's never had a father, so he has some obvious daddy issues that we'll see come into play a little bit later. But this whole sentiment is true. There are so many things that we don't tell our friends, partners, family, personal things that we don't open up about. Would it be better to share them? Some things, I think, you know, they allow you to understand the other person better, but other things, like, for example, Ted being in love with Michael. What good could come out of that? I mean, there's a slight chance that Michael could be interested back in him, but probably there's not going to be much good that comes out of him sharing that information. Then Justin goes to Debbie's house, and I guess he got her address from the diner. I guess he also could have looked it up in the phone book, too. Lindsay has come to see Brian at the loft, and he's in a robe. I know from the script that he's in a robe because apparently he just had a shower, and then I wonder, was he in the shower when Justin was trying to get in, and that's why he didn't answer? Or was he just not home yet? She says that Melanie feels terrible about what she said.
We don't have any beeps or wires or little white dots telling us we're alive, so how do we know?
Maybe we know from what people expect from us. I mean, take Gus. He needs me to feed him, to change him. Knowing that tells me I'm alive. So for me right now, it's him.
And I think the right now is key here.
What about me?
Ted needs you now. So maybe that's what tells you you're alive. You'll do the right thing, whatever it is.
You don't know that.
I really love this moment between the two of them here. We again are just seeing how close the two of them are and how real and vulnerable Brian allows himself to be around her. We also see how scared Brian is that he's not going to make the right decision. An awful thing to do to someone, isn't it? Like, make them have to decide that. Then Brian goes to see Ted at the hospital.
Fuck you. For going home with some tweaked out little Twinkie and thinking you got lucky.
But if he knew everything that Ted went through before that, you know, Ted was all like, he's not interested in me. How could he be? And Michael was encouraging him and encouraging him. Also, I can't believe Michael doesn't feel any guilt about what happened. I mean, good for him for not doing that. You know, whenever you see people in TV shows and movies and they feel guilty over something that obviously wasn't their fault, you're like, come on, it's not your fault. But Michael doesn't have that problem. He doesn't feel any guilt, even though he was the one who kept saying, yeah, go after that Blake guy. Over and over again. It's just kind of funny earlier when they were like, oh, who do you think gave him the drugs? And Michael's like, oh, I bet it was that guy Blake. And I'm like, he didn't have any moment of, oh man, am I partially responsible? I pushed him into his arms. But anyways, Ted was feeling so down on himself and just couldn't believe that someone was interested in him. Ted did seem to know that he was a tweaker.
He's got some crystal meth in his eye.
But at least someone was interested in him. And, you know, Brian really doesn't know what that feels like at all. He fears that that'll happen eventually, but he doesn't know what that's like. But I get it. Brian is mad that Ted allowed this whole thing to happen.
And fuck you for choosing me. I'd let you lie here forever. How'd you like that? You should die more often. Or live. So that I don't have to say yes. Yes, I'll do it. I'll give you what you want. What you need. But don't think it's for you. It's not. It's from me.
So another scene that I really love. It feels a little theatery, especially at the beginning of the scene, but I think it works here. The acting is fantastic, and I like the sentiment behind it and everything. It's a really beautiful scene. Also, Brian makes sure that Ted can't hear him before he tells him that he's not so bad looking.
Can you hear me?
And I think it goes to show that confidence is really a lot. Because Ted isn't bad looking. In fact, he's pretty good looking. It's more just his attitude and his lack of confidence. And that's what's harming him the most.
It's from me.
But I think it is also for Ted a bit too. Just doesn't want to say that even to no one, someone who's in a coma. Then that hot nurse from earlier comes right up to Brian and behind him. Brian is shocked to see him, and they start making out and having sex. So I think this is a bit, especially with the drum beat in the background, of him being like feeling alive and not dead. How do you know you're alive? That whole thing he was talking about before. So he's like, you know, right now in this moment, I'm alive, and this is how I know right now. And he's going to live while he can. There was also a little issue with the guy who plays the male nurse here, which led to them having sex meetings that I'm sure you've all heard about. Like on the day of the shoot, he said he wouldn't get naked or whatever, so they had to film it like this. And it is kind of an odd sex scene for queer as folk, because usually they show a lot and they don't here. I think it really works here in this scene, and maybe even made it better, you know, when they just kind of pan away from it and onto Ted, so you don't even really see anything of that sex scene happening. The focus is on Ted here, and it's like he's seeing this and he's like, oh, of course this is what's happening right now.
Jesus.
Great words to wake up with, or word. I also like how it's kind of like the sex is what wakes Ted up, and by that I mean Brian choosing to be alive is what makes him wake up. And it's like only when Brian decides that he's going to do this for Ted, that he's going to end his life because that's what Ted wants, or what he thinks that Ted wants, is when Ted's able to wake up. So it's interesting. I mean, the episode title is Ted's Not Dead. It's all about how Ted's in this coma, but it seemed to, the episode ended up being a lot more about Brian and what that meant for him. I mean, we learned a little bit more about Ted's background and stuff. It was only when Brian had made the decision that Ted woke up. So it was more like the whole episode was waiting for that had to happen. Justin says that he can't go home because his mom knows.
I am proud to have a gay son. We know. And brother.
Thanks, sis.
Vic's reaction, as opposed to Michael's reaction, Michael's is to say, we know, but Vic says, thanks, sis, and he really looks like he means it here, so quite opposite reactions.
I've always said it isn't who you love, it's how you love.
Aw, words to live by.
It's about Brian's one-night stand.
Not just one.
Don't bet on it.
Okay, so Michael really could not tell at all earlier when Brian was lying to him about what he did the night before. So he just completely believed him and took him at his word. He was probably a little bit too eager to believe it. So before on his face, that really was just relief.
I'll go to New York. I'll become a hustler and I'll sell my body to gross old homos.
I'll give you $20.
Oh my God, I love it. I love Vic so much.
It's not a joke, you know. Gay teens have a very high suicide rate.
True. Thank you, Debbie.
Unfortunately, not this one.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I can't even. So Debbie hits Michael on the arm when he says that, and even Vic sees that Michael took it too far. This comment is just, oh Michael, you're trying to make me hate you, aren't you? Unfortunately not this one. It's not funny. So Justin wanders into Michael's childhood bedroom. He sees the picture of Brian and Michael when they were teenagers.
Now she knows. It's not drugs. It's not booze. He didn't buy an automatic weapon to take down to the Spanish club. It's just cock.
And I kind of like this line from Vic because it's true. When you see your kid obviously struggling, keeping secrets, sneaking out, you worry that it's the worst. You worry that they're on drugs or they're drinking. And then you find out that it's just this. You know, that's the big secret. That's what they've been hiding. That's what they've been wrestling with. And then it's up to the parents on how they're going to react from there, but there's got to be some relief. I mean, in some cases, a lot of relief, but in other cases, you know, there's got to be at least some relief there. So then Brian comes in, and Michael called him about Justin. And then Michael tells Brian to get Justin out of his house.
By the way, Ted woke up.
I love the look on Brian's face when he says that. How happy he is about that. How happy he is to be the one delivering the news. And how he doesn't say it right away. I just love the joy here. So we see that Brian is in a really good mood right now. I also love that he rolls up his sleeves when he goes up the stairs. I also love how Brian just walks into the house. You know, he doesn't knock, he doesn't ring the doorbell like Justin did. He just walks right in. Something that he's been doing for years, probably since he was 14 years old. This has been kind of like a second home to him. Even a more welcome home, although we'll get to that. But I don't know, I just love that even after all these years, he still can just walk into Debbie's house. So Justin is still looking at the picture when Brian comes in, and Brian shuts the door, and then Justin doesn't see Brian, but he just smiles. He knows that he's there without looking to see who it is. The song Straight to Number 1 is playing, and it plays at least in one other episode later on that I can remember.
I like Ted. There's a real sweetheart in there somewhere.
And oh, she's right, there is a sweetheart in there. And let me tell you, I bet that Debbie would love to see Michael with Ted as opposed to Brian. So Justin goes to kiss Brian, but then Brian keeps, pulling back until finally Brian kisses Justin. So we're just seeing that Brian always wants to be the one, or always has to be the one that's in control. And Michael's giving some really creepy looks up to the ceiling/bedroom. I guess he somehow knows exactly what's going on up there. He can just sense it. Like Justin can sense when Brian walks into the room. Michael can sense when Brian is getting blown. This look kills me every time. I don't know why. It's just so funny. It's so creepy and weird, but so hilarious. So what does this all mean that this is happening right now? We already know that Brian is really happy and he's in a good mood because of everything that happened with Ted waking up. And maybe Brian also feels really alive right now and happy. This is the third time that he's been with Justin, so maybe he's starting to like him. I mean, I think he does. I think that his good mood is helping the situation. I think he also wants to go back to Justin too because it's kind of familiar and nice. Or maybe I'm just reading too much into this, like always. Then Justin and Brian come downstairs. Justin smiles at Michael. Honestly, Michael deserves it. I mean, everything that he said about Justin in this episode and the last one, you deserve that smile, Michael. And the description here for Justin's smile right there is, Justin looks like the cat that ate the canary. And he does. And then Debbie calls Justin Sunshine again.
What are you studying in school? It's called conversation.
Oh, I love Vic. I love Brian's laugh here. I just love that he's laughing and he's having a really good time. Until he sees the dirty look that Michael gives him. And then Brian looks ashamed. I love the way that Justin mouths spy to Brian here.
You can fuck him at your place, you can fuck him in his gym class, you can fuck him at the zoo, but you cannot fuck him in my mother's house. In my room.
Your jealousy is showing, Michael. Why is it worse if it's in your room? Okay. Okay, 1 second. So I would be really upset if someone had sex in my room. In my bed. I mean, they didn't do it in his bed, but I would be really upset if someone did. It's his childhood room. Like, Michael doesn't even live there anymore, and he hasn't for a really long time. I don't know, it's hard for me to think how I would react in that situation, because I'm still in my childhood room, so I have not left. And I doubt I will be anytime soon. And the look on Brian's face is just like, oh, I'm being scolded right now. He's seeing Michael's jealousy kind of bubbling up.
Okay, I'm gonna go do this little job, and then I'm gonna go see Ted at the hospital. You do whatever the fuck you want.
Michael's like, ooh, I'm going to the hospital like a good friend, you dirty whore. That's what it feels like Michael's saying to Brian right there. I'm like, Brian just came from the hospital. That's where he was like an hour ago. He just came from there. He was there when Ted woke up. Where were you, Michael? Where were you? I mean, I was doing something at the time that I'm sure Ted didn't appreciate, but you know, I was there. Obviously, Michael is just insanely jealous here. I get it. I would be too in Michael's situation. Just like as a side note, I don't know if I've said this before, but all these instances of me pointing out how jealous Michael is and how obsessed with Brian he is, and I get it. I would probably be the same way. I mean, I don't know if I'd be quite so hostile about it. I'd have those same feelings too if I were in that situation. And I think that when people talk about how much they hate Michael sometimes in the show, I feel like what they're not seeing is that you would probably be the Michael in this situation, or that, you know, how can you blame Michael for being in love with Brian, you know? But I think that Brian's face here is that, you know, he feels a little bit bad. Michael has just shamed him. But I think maybe he also sees that a lot of that is also Michael's jealousy, because Brian didn't really do anything wrong at all. I mean, it was a little bit inconsiderate of him to do that in Michael's childhood room, but I really don't even think that it was intentional or malicious in any way. Like, he wasn't thinking about that at all. He wasn't like, oh, I know I'm gonna get Michael riled up by doing this in his room. Like, that's just the room that Justin happened to be in. If Justin had actually walked into the bathroom, they probably would have done that in the bathroom. Justin looks like he's having a great time in the back of Debbie's car. He's really enjoying himself, and that he would love to have a mother like that who's so cool about it and open and everything and funny and out there. But he's also not giving his mother the chance. He's not giving her the chance to be like that and to react like that because he's just running away right now. Although Justin does know what his own home is like and what expectations there are of him. So he knows his home situation better than anybody else does. So as much as he is running scared right now, there's probably he probably has some reason to be.
That's nice, huh? Like that old buzzard at our house.
So Debbie is really impressed with Justin's house and everything, and he clearly comes from a more upper class background than Debbie and Michael do.
Rude little shit, isn't he?
Yeah, he is.
And this is my gay son, Michael.
Like, that's a funny line, and I love it, but it's also nice because she's letting Jennifer know that she has a gay son, too. And not only that, but he's all grown up and everything's fine.
Who's there? It's no one.
That Jennifer is desperate for him, for her husband, not to come out right now, not to see who brought her son home. I mean, she also probably hasn't even told him that Justin ran away. She desperately doesn't want her husband to figure out or to find out that Justin is gay. All we know about Mr. Taylor is what we heard him yell from inside the house and that little comment that she made about him to Justin earlier. But already, he doesn't seem like the best guy. The fact that she's just desperately trying to keep him inside the house because she knows how he would react.
I mean, I always knew about Michael. In fact, I told him, right? To spare him the pain of having to tell me. So, Jennifer, don't ask, are you? Because it's never a question. Just say, I know.
So it's nice what Debbie does here. She's trying to help someone who was her. And I think it's nice what she says. I do think that asking your kid if they're gay probably isn't the right way for most people because they may not be ready to let you know yet, and then it's not on their own terms. But, you know, everybody's different. So the I know approach seems better, but I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this. It's a nice idea, some nice lines, delivered really well. It's just, I think everybody's different. I think everybody is completely different, and you never know which approach is the right approach for a parent to take.
I was trying to help.
You try too much.
He's not very nice to his mother. Then again, neither is Justin right now. It basically just seems like Michael and Justin both want a mother who's more like the other one.
You're still wearing that same old coat.
So someday you'll buy me a mink.
Yeah, right. You'll freeze to death first. What was that for?
You could be such an asshole.
What'd I do?
Yes, he can. Like, that wasn't a nice thing to say at all. Michael doesn't seem to be very aware at all. Like, she's already feeling super self-conscious after seeing that really nice house. And then he goes and says that? Like, he's basically saying, ugh, Mom, you're so low class. Look at that nice house.
You don't know yourself. Know thyself.
Which reminds me of that line earlier in the episode that Ted's mom said, loving someone is different than knowing them. So it's kind of a theme here. You can love someone and not know who they really are, like Jennifer was for a while with Justin, or like Ted's mom was with Ted, but that's made harder when that person doesn't even know themselves, like Michael. Ted is packing up and his mom is there.
I wish you had someone to love you. I mean, if you did, maybe this wouldn't have happened.
I mean, that's kind of true.
I'm sorry. I know that it embarrasses you if I talk too much or I get too emotional. But I can't help thinking that if you hadn't woken up, and I would never have gotten a chance to let you know how proud I am that you're my son. And that it doesn't matter to me what you are. You know, I got over that a long time ago. And that whenever you're feeling alone or that no one loves you, it's not true. Because I do.
Oh God, I love this part so much. And after watching this scene, I'm just like, okay, I really love Ted's mom. I love her so much. That was so nice of her to say all that. I really wish that we got to see more of her. I wish that she came back. Spoiler alert, she does not. We never see her ever again. I wish we did, because this seemed to be a real turning point in their relationship. But I guess it ended up just being this one moment of honesty that I never got to see again. I mean, I think it would have been nice to see her again, especially when she says to Ted, you know, when you're thinking that no one loves you, know that I do. I think that would have been nice to see that again. I don't know, I just really love that whole speech she gives. She cares about him and she loves him so much. Yeah, she was saying some stuff earlier that wasn't great, but she was upset and she thought her son was going to die. Obviously had some issues in the past with their relationship, but they seem to have really turned a corner here. She seems to have really turned a corner here. She really loves him and she's so proud of him, and she finally got to say that to him. So obviously this is something that she's been thinking for so long, but she just never said, and I'm gonna get so emotional. Something that we could all do, you know, whatever. Also the part where she says, I know it embarrasses you if I talk too much or get too emotional. Oh my God. I relate to that so hard, and I feel bad. I remember, you know, watching that and just feeling really, really called out, because I feel bad because that's how I react to my mom too a lot of the time. Most of the time. Like all of the time. And I feel really bad about it. I just can't seem to stop. I can't seem to stop that. I don't know why. But anyways, I really related to Ted here. And I got that so much. Anyways, Ted seems very emotional about this too. Just like me. He's got tears in his eyes. And he just seems like really, really glad to hear his mom say that. But he still doesn't show his emotions too much. He just kind of thanks her for it and then moves on. So the gang is at Ted's apartment. And he's really just up and at him. I guess it was just like one of those 24-hour coma things. I love the moment where Ted just moves the lamp back to where it was before Emmett moved it. Ted is putting everything back to normal. Apparently he stayed in the hospital for 3 days after he woke up.
We bought you a whole fucking chicken.
And you're gonna eat it.
Oh, I love what you can hear Emmett saying in the background here.
Oh my God, look at this. Who keeps lube in their friggin' kitchen cabinet?
I love that. I'm also like, did you guys miss the lube? Did you guys, I guess, not think to look in the kitchen cabinets? Or maybe you got distracted by the creepy little collage that Ted's got going? And Ted and Michael are in Ted's room.
It always looks so much smaller.
What does?
Your life. Especially after returning from a near-death experience.
And that is very true, too.
You know, if there's something you can't talk about.
Like what?
I don't know. You know, maybe if you talk about it, it might help it. But, you know, you might not get what you want. But... oh, shit.
Okay, so Ted might be kind of realizing what Michael means here. And so if he does realize what Michael is saying, he also now knows for sure that Michael doesn't feel the same way about him, and that he never will, because that's what he's telling him, basically. So I guess what we've learned from this is that Ted was right not to say anything about it before, because it wouldn't have changed anything. Oh, and then Brian comes in.
Are you going to come eat the chicken?
So do we think that Brian knew that Michael would be floundering in there? And did he maybe want to get Ted and Michael out of that situation? Also, I wonder if Brian ever knew or suspected that Ted was in love with Michael. Actually, now that I'm remembering, this is something that we see later on. Also because Brian might know what Michael's talking to Ted about.
Why did you choose me?
My mother couldn't do it. Michael and Emmett couldn't do it. But you could. Because you're a heartless shit. You could pull the plug and you wouldn't cry. And you'd know when it's time to go.
Okay, so wow, there's so much there. The whole
Ted, for example, thinks I'm a heartless shit.
So Brian knew what Ted thought about him, and he was right when he said that earlier in season 1, episode 2. We know that Ted's not right about Brian, and Brian knows that too. Brian said in 102 that that's, not who he is, and Michael, seemed to agree and all of that, but Ted still thinks that that's who Brian is. And then Brian just looks so hurt by what Ted says. It's like disbelief mixed with hurt, and he's just kind of sitting there like, wow, that's really what people think of me, that I don't care about anyone. Ted also doesn't seem to notice the hurt look on Brian's face at all. Ted just walks out of that room with the same opinion of Brian that he came into it with. And it's sad because Brian, must have thought, wow, he really trusts me or cares about me, to make this my decision, to put this in my hands. But really it was just because he thought that he was heartless and practical. And I get it, from an outside and an observant perspective, I'd probably think that too. And I would especially think that out of all of them, out of all of Ted's friends, Brian would know when it's time to give up living, and he wouldn't get overly upset about pulling the plug. So then Brian is dancing with Michael at Babylon.
I want it to be you. I'll put it in writing.
I want it to be you too. You pull my plug.
So they're back at Babylon already after everything. They're back to where they started. Thumpa Thumpa continues, as they say. What is the significance of wanting to pull each other's plugs? I guess that they trust each other. It always makes me a little bit confused though, because this little tag at the end with the plug pulling thing, it kind of goes against what we just saw in the last scene. But oh well, I guess it's just, showing how close these two are, and maybe even that they're both alive because they need each other. That how do you know you're alive when someone needs you? Brian knew that it was because Ted needed him in that moment, and now they know they're alive because they need each other. I don't know. Everybody needs everybody. Everybody's pulling plugs left and right.
Butt plug, butt plug, butt plug, butt plug.
So the name of this episode is Ted's Not Dead, which is seemingly a spoiler for the end of the episode, although I always look at it as Ted's not dead, but he's in a coma. So, when I first watched it, I didn't really see it as a spoiler. I was like, oh, Ted's not dead, and then it started and he was in a coma, and I was like, oh, he's in a coma, but he's gonna die. Something that always kind of bothered me with this episode was that it felt like all of the characters knew what was going to happen in the end. Like, they all knew the episode title was Ted's Not Dead. They all knew that Ted wasn't going to die, even though consistently throughout the episode, we kept finding out that the doctors are saying there's no way he's going to wake up. It was almost like all the characters had flipped ahead to the last pages of the script and found out. It's not even like the doctors are saying, oh, he might not make it, or there's a chance he could wake up. It's just like, yeah, there's no chance, he's gonna die for sure. And so Michael and Emmett and Brian just don't seem too upset about it at all. So when I first watched this episode, I honestly thought, oh, okay, so Brian and Emmett and Michael aren't really close friends with Ted because they don't really seem to care that he's gonna die. Now, after watching this episode a few times, I still think that a little bit. I mean, we definitely see that their relationship with Ted gets much deeper as the show goes on, but after seeing it a few times, I can see that these characters are really upset about it. They're kind of in shock. I mean, we're seeing them literally like the first day, like the morning after, so it's just happened. And they're each dealing with it in their own way. We see Brian's turmoil and his pain management, though that's largely due to the decision that he has to make. And then, Michael tries to comfort Ted's mother. Emmett just seems kind of numb, and then he's sharing some things with Michael. I don't know, I can see that each of them was dealing with it and is upset, but I really was like, the first time I watched it, I was like, oh, okay, so the four of them aren't really like a tight-knit group. That opinion for me carried on into the first season. I kept thinking, oh, they're not great friends with Ted, or the four of them aren't really that close. And, it kind of took me a while to change that opinion when I was watching it the first time. They become closer friends with Ted later on, and I think they're still kind of close here, but honestly, sometimes, it still does kind of seem like they know how the episode ends. I don't know, it's just a little bit weird for me watching it. So in the UK version, the Ted character Phil has an overdose just like this, except he dies. And Daniel Lippman, one of the showrunners, really wanted to kill Ted off in this version too. He really wanted to have that shock factor of one of the main characters dying in the third episode of the series. But then they met the actor who played Ted, Scott Lowell, and they really fell in love with him and how he played that character and everything, so they decided to let him live. Thank God. So I really like this episode. It feels a little bit different than the previous three, but it's still really great. We learned some more about Ted. We learn a lot more about Brian. Justin's two worlds kind of start to collide, and he starts to deal with his mother more. We get some great stuff from Emmett and Michael, and we get some more Brighton development. We get a lot more Uncle Vic, which I always love, and Daphne. Yeah, I think it's a really solid episode. Yeah, just kind of the themes about death and mortality and knowing who you are and other people knowing you. And then also that goes back to when Emmett and Michael have that talk and they're like, you know, it's kind of like, oh, we really don't know each other that well. Like we don't tell each other things. So that's another connecting to that theme of knowing people and who people really are. And then, you know, Justin's mother kind of finding out who he is. So that was season 1, episode 4 of Queer as Folk, Ted's Not Dead. Next week is season 1, episode 5, now approaching the line. Do all those things, like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. Like I said before, all my social media stuff is down below. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Bye, see you next week.